Earlier this year in September, I decided to step up my composting game. Since I built the garden back in February of 2021, I have been doing quite a bit of composting here, but it's been a little bit haphazard. I built bins, I filled bins, I didn't like the bins, so I took them down. I tried open air heaps, didn't like that system either. But I always had an idea of what I wanted to do, and in September I finally did it. And behind me is the end result of that. Let me walk you through. This structure is situated outside of the garden at the northeast corner so that it doesn't interfere with the sun hitting the garden. It didn't cost much money to install. It's entirely, the structure itself is entirely made from reclaimed materials around the property, and the pickle barrels I bought from Facebook Marketplace. When we head around the back, I'll show you that. The fence posts are holding them up, and those are actual fence posts that came down from a fence that didn't make it on the property. They're not that tall, so I couldn't sink them deep into the ground, but I really didn't need to. I think the front are maybe about 6 inches in, the backs are maybe about somewhere between 10 and 12 inches in to give me some slope. The roofing structure is actually only about 80 square feet in total. The front panels that you see, I'm still playing around with those. It's just random pieces of wood and scrap that I'm finding around the property that I'm cutting to size, trying to figure out what kind of configuration I like the most. I will say that if you're planning to do this, I much prefer thinner slats as opposed to bigger pieces of plywood for the front, because as you're moving the bin from the material from one bin to the other, it's a lot easier to take off a slat at a time as opposed to a big chunk like this piece right here. If I take that down, there's a really good chance that material is going to pour out the front while I'm trying to flip it over into bay 2. So I would highly recommend for you, if you're looking to do something like this, and for me in the future, more slatted pieces. Now, the way I'm going to approach this is pretty similar to anybody's composting system. I'm going to fill material in bay 1 for as long as it takes to get a good balance between nitrogen heavy items and carbon heavy items. I'll water it in as it goes, and then when it gets to a certain height, it'll get hot enough to start cooking down. I'll add more material to it, and then at some point I'm going to say enough's enough. I'll let it sit for a few more days, and then I'll flip it over into bay 2, and I'll let it sit there for a while, and then bay 3 and bay 4. In my head, I'm thinking right now probably about 30 to 45 days in each bin before it winds up at the far bin. And then once it's in the far bin, my thought is I want it to go either straight to the garden at that point, or, as I said in the last video when you saw me flipping material from bay 3 to bay 4, I may put a staging area over here, and that'll probably be nothing more than taking some of this corrugated metal roofing and just scabbing it on along the front and side just to create another bin. I wouldn't have a roof on that, and it probably wouldn't have to be that deep. It may even be wider than the 4 feet by 4 feet. And really the goal is just to hold it until I want to get it out to the garden. Now, as far as materials go, I primarily use things like kitchen scraps, a little bit of wood chip, cuttings from the fields, and deciduous leaves. Now, for the leaves, one of the bigger challenges I've had is how do I stage them? Because, as you can see in the background here, all of those maple leaves, that willow oak over there, I have access to all of that. And I do bring it over to the garden. The problem has been so far, how do I actually stage this stuff so that it sits and I can use it when I have more nitrogen-rich materials, which I get in the late spring to the early fall when I'm making my field cuttings. So a couple of weeks ago, I took 4 pieces of 12-foot corrugated metal roofing that came from a canopy that fell off of a building here, and this is what I put together. So I've got, what's that, 244 cubic feet that I've been loading the leaves up in, and you can see I still have leaves and a little bit of a cutting over there that need to make it in. Closer to the house, I have more leaves that need to make it in. So I'll throw a bunch in there, I'll stamp them down, and this is gonna stay until late spring when I start getting my cuttings. By then I'll have the first bay open. Long before then I'll have the first bay open, and then I can really quickly put together a pile, water it in, let it sink a bit, add more to it, and then start the flipping process and just refill bay 1 pretty much the moment it opens up again. So that's gonna be my composting system, and I'm excited to see how it works in the coming year, because it's the first time in the 4 years I've had this garden that I've got a system that I feel a lot more confident in, and I think is gonna be a lot more consistently easy for me to execute on. Now, the other thing that I wanted this building to serve was water capture. Now, I rely on Mother Nature's rainfall to irrigate my garden. I have a well at the house, and there is a hose bib closer to the garden that's fed off of that well, but I'm not always that keen on pulling from that for irrigation. I don't mind doing that for establishing plants when I transplant seedlings or when I direct sow something. But when we have really dry spells, which happen pretty often here in the Piedmont region of North Carolina, I'm less inclined to really drain that tank at the house, because that's what we use to, drink water out of and shower out of. So I wanted a bit of redundancy, and to do that, I set this system up. It's an 80 square foot roof and a 16-foot gutter running the length, landing in that far barrel over there. Typically, if it wasn't freezing right now during the nights, these would be set up daisy chained with hoses and splitters, and when that barrel fills up, they all fill up at the same rate. And the system's worked great so far. I've been thrilled about that. The biggest challenge I've had so far is when I have the system all connected, I have a little piece of hose coming off of this one that has a two-way splitter, and I'll have a piece of hose here, and it does not have a great flow rate. And I think it's because it's a pretty constricted splitter and hose, because when I actually see the water flow off of the valve, it's got a really great flow rate. It's much more constrained when the splitter's attached. So that was a bit of a, that's gonna be an improvement in the future if I want it to flow better. I haven't quite figured out what I want to do with that yet, if anything, but in the meantime, I'm just happy that the water's actually getting captured. So there you have it, folks. That's my newly installed compost system with water capture. I hope this inspires you to look around your property if you have access to materials and cobble something together. It doesn't have to be pretty, it just has to function. In the meantime, thanks for watching. Take care, and we'll see you in the next one.